The members of the public who are here, it looks like we have a lot of empty seats. It's just that we are at the height of the legislative session. There are a number of committees that are taking place throughout the building. So we have members that will be coming in and out. We have sent them all the bills, and so members will be coming in to hear testimony and will be hearing the bills. We have other members who are not at the table, but they're here eating their dinner because the committee went quite late, and so we had about maybe a half an hour break for the members. So don't be concerned. Tonight, I think the way I've spoken with the three authors, Senators Marty and Dibble and Torres Ray, and the way we like to proceed is that we'd like to have the authors present their bills. And then once the authors are finished presenting their bills, we will have those in support of the bills come up and speak to all three bills if possible. And if you want to speak to a specific provision of any of the bills, please make that explicit. And then we will have those in opposition to the three bills come up and speak. And if you could be specific about which bill you're speaking to, or if you're interested in speaking in generalities, that's certainly all right too. Members of the committee have had a long day, including the chair. So we ask you to please be on point and help us manage the time. We started this committee at 3 o'clock, and we'd like to get home maybe by 9-ish, if possible. But we appreciate all of you being here for tonight's hearing, and we will start, I think, with Senator Marty, and then we'll go to Senator Dibble, and we'll end with Senator Torres Ray. And Senator Marty, each of you will present your bill, right? You don't have anybody here explain the bills. You will be presenting your bills. All right, Senator Marty, welcome to the committee. Senate File 120.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm very pleased to be here with you tonight to talk about this. I remember less than a decade ago when we were here talking about constitutional amendments to prohibit gay marriage, and I think it's now time that we are talking positively about passing gay marriage. My goal is to make this happen as quick as we can. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the genesis of my bill. I think this is something I've supported all along. My wife and I have been married nearly 30 years. I think it's been wonderful for us, and I think others ought to be able to choose who their partner is and ought to be involved in a married relationship if that's what their choice is. And 2 years ago, I won't call him a young man, but I might call him the Senate greeter because he always stands at the top of the stairway for the last 5, 6, 7 years to greet us when we enter the Senate chamber during sessions. Individual Doug Benson, who's been standing there asking for permission for himself and his partner to be married. He's been there, standing there every day for many years now, and he came up to me a couple years ago and asked if I would be willing to author legislation to allow him and his life partner to get married. I agreed to do so and introduce legislation that's now Senate File, there's a different bill in the previous biennium, but now it's Senate File 120, which would grant equal marriage rights for all LGBT families. At the time it was introduced, I think a lot of people would argue it had no chance of passing. The struggle looked monumental, and there was, as we all remember from 2003 and 2004, there was strong opposition to the concept of gay marriage in Minnesota. I think much of that opposition was based on fear and misunderstanding. It was a concept that most Minnesotans weren't familiar with. But I believe Minnesotans are fair-minded and willing to listen. As more LGBT couples come out of the closet, the public is getting to know about their wonderful families. Minnesotans are becoming aware that LGBT folks and their families are hardworking people. They go to church, they go to work, they're good neighbors. Many of them are parents and they're raising kids. They're active in the PTA. They take their kids to Little League. They're people who, like other families, take care of each other, especially when times of sickness or times when people need each other. So I'm convinced as Minnesotans have been learning more about this issue, and the polls have suggested the same, that it's changing attitudes. I've never yet seen a single cogent argument on how a marriage between two women would hurt anybody else's marriage. Likewise, I think people can see the marriage between Doug and his partner Duane would not affect their own any more than my marriage with Connie would affect anybody else's marriage. It's our marriage, it's our business, we care about each other. I appreciate this hearing because I think the conversation, the discussion here moves it forward, and Minnesota values come to the forefront. As a result, more and more people are beginning to reject discrimination against same-sex families. Some people say, why are we talking about it this year when we've got a stiff recession and everything else? Well, I'd say this makes it even more urgent that we talk about the issue. Minnesota lesbian and gay families deserve the same rights that other families have. They deserve the right to have their children qualify for their health care. They have the right to get the same benefits at work. They have the right to visit each other in the hospital, the right to inherit each other's property, legislation that each of us has been carrying over the number of years. This legislation would take care of that. With the discrimination they face, this year's economic challenges hitting every family are particularly hard-hitting, so I think that's important. Fortunately, through the outreach work of groups like OutFront Minnesota and PFLAG and Marriage Equality Minnesota, attitudes are changing. I don't think they're changing by the decade. I think they're changing by the month. Promise of marriage equality for Minnesota families, I think, is within reach. I know we're not going to have a vote tonight. My goal is to have it happen as quickly as we can. I think that next year we could actually pass and get this law signed into law. That's my goal. I'll quickly go through the bill. Senate File 120. The title says it all, relating to marriage, providing for gender-neutral marriage laws, which is, I think, the society's interest to treat people equally. It starts out with Section 1, simply a citation that we're calling it the Marriage and Family Protection Act. The legislative findings simply make several findings that I think are very important. Marriage is a legal institution that's recognized by the state to promote stable relationships and protect people in their relationships, in those relationships and their children. Second finding, that current law discriminates against same-sex couples, denying them and their families rights and responsibilities, including the right to pension, Social Security survivor benefits, right to family and medical leave, and numerous other benefits and obligations. Next one is that the state has an interest in encouraging stable relationships regardless of gender or sexual orientation of the partners, and the entire community benefits. The next one is that despite long-standing discrimination, Minnesotans have formed long-lasting, committed, caring relationships. These couples share their lives together, participate in communities, raise children, and care for dependent family members together. Permitting those couples to marry would further our interest in promoting family relationships and protecting family members during life crises. Next finding, that fundamental fairness requires same-sex couples to be married on the same terms as heterosexual couples. Next one is that Minnesota's exclusion of same-sex couples from marriage serves no legitimate government purpose and is contrary to the public interest. Discrimination and harm caused by this prohibition cannot be remedied except by permitting those couples to marry. And finally, that the state should not interfere with the religious beliefs of its people. Just as a church or religious denomination that objects to same-sex marriage has the right to refuse to solemnize those marriages, a church or religious denomination that believes in the value of same-sex marriage should have the right to solemnize those marriages. Section 3 simply takes the human rights section of the law where we talk about equal rights based on gender orientation to delete the specific reference saying it does not authorize marriage between persons of the same sex. Section 4 just changes the marriage as a civil contract language from a man and a woman to allowing two persons, two adults, to consent to marriage to each other. Section 5 deals with the prohibitions of marriage, and it just strikes the prohibitions on same-sex marriage. Section 6 discusses the marriage license, and instead of the bride and groom, talks about the parties to the marriage. Section 7 changes the language in the solemnization language to husband and wife or spouse. And Section 8 just tells the reviser to correct all other statutes where they have used husband and wife or male or female to use gender-neutral terms. And it's a very simple law, simple legislation. I think it's very understandable to people. I think it's a matter of simple fairness. I think it's time for it. And I thank you for holding the hearing.
All right, thank you, Senator Marty. Any questions for Senator Marty on his bill? Senator Dibble, Senate File 1210.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate File 1210 is about love, commitment, and responsibility. Madam Chair, my colleague, Senator Marty, was articulate and eloquent, and it will be hard to match his eloquence, and he's spoken quite passionately and very ably on this matter, as well as a strong ally. Marriage is a vital institution that cannot be doubted. It is that thing that represents a lifetime of commitment between two people in good times and in bad times. It is an institution worthy of tremendous honor and respect, one that we deeply cherish, everyone in this room. When two people have come together, committed to that lifetime of responsibility, mutual support, and shared sacrifice, we are all better off for it. Our whole community is strengthened. And our policies, as expressed in the laws of Minnesota, reflect that in numerous ways. Simply by entering into marriage, a number of things are provided for in that bond, in that family, having to do with issues as broad as health care, property ownership, inheritance, economic responsibility, legal standing. We talk about the vows of a ceremony in sickness and in health, visiting each other in hospitals, making emergency medical decisions, sharing health plans, taking medical leave to care for those who are sick, who live in our homes, whom we love, for richer and for poorer. Governments, banks, credit card companies will consider both incomes and assets or debts in matters relating to taxes, credit, loans, inheritance, in those unfortunate circumstances when there are divorces, eligibility for public accommodations, Medicaid, Social Security benefits, etc. When a child joins a family, their life as well is provided for and made much more stable, enabling spouses to be joint parents, covering circumstances of school, medical decisions, passports, inheritance, visitation, child support obligations, again, in those unfortunate circumstances. And of course, in that time that we all face, the end of our lives, enabling a survivor to continue to care or to be cared for, making sure that arrangements can be provided for, funeral arrangements, epitaphs, inheritance, again, of housing, leases, having standing in court should a death occur under wrongful circumstances, even something as simple, according the simple dignity of taking bereavement leave, something that has been asked and denied on numerous occasions, passing on property, et cetera. Madam Chair and members, it's as simple as that. Upholding and cherishing and valuing and respecting an institution that is absolutely at the foundation of our lives, privately, and our life as a community, and our life as a state. Madam Chair, my bill actually is very similar in many respects to Senator Marty's. It simply continues to uphold the laws, the provisions, the protections, the public interest policies. A couple of them I don't completely agree with, but we didn't take a whack at those quite yet, maybe sometime in the future. But, and simply, for the most part, strikes language in 363A.27, this is section 1, that confines definitions, again, in 517.01, recognizing marriage as a civil contract, simply clarifying that providing all the conditions that are provided for today, two people can enter into this enter into this civil contract. Also, Madam Chair, just to be clear, as Senator Marty is clear in his bill, we're confining ourselves solely to those matters of civil, legal, and economic concern, and not reaching into those things that are constitutionally and rightly so protected, particularly in the exercise of freedom of belief and freedom of religion. And so we make a protection for that in those statutes that govern the solemnization of marriages in 517.09, that's section 5. Madam Chair, that's my bill and my presentation. I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for Senator Dibble? This bill. Senator Torres Ray, welcome to the committee. Senate File 1732.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members. I I'm very thankful for the opportunity to present Senate File 1732, and very thankful to be sitting here with Senator Dibble and Senator Marty and have this opportunity. Madam Chair, I know that your committee really is here to review the judicial aspects of this bill, but if you could indulge me with a couple of minutes of your time, I would like to share with you perhaps the personal reasons for why I am here and what has motivated me to pursue this and to work with Senator Marty and Senator Dibble in the pursuit of this legislation to recognize same-sex marriage. I happen to live in a community where I have experienced becoming a parent with multiple families that are involved lesbian women and gay men who have children, and they are growing up with my two boys. And we have become very close friends, and we spend a tremendous amount of time together. In fact, the women in my block really have taught me a lot of what I know today about what it means to be a parent. And I said this because I took for granted many of the rights that I had as a parent and as a member of a bisexual couple, where we simply got pregnant because it was an accident, and then a boy came up, and then we tried to figure out how to take care of that boy, and then quickly we realized that we had to do a few things and save some money for his school, while my friends across the street had to go through a very long period of time and a tremendous ordeal to make this decision of who will get pregnant, how can they adopt a child, and go through extensive reviews, court reviews, and really a process that for me, as a neighbor and as a friend, was quite excruciating to see my friends go through. And so through them, I learned that being a parent was quite a complicated issue, and I really needed to be more thoughtful about the process. During this time, my friends, who are the most exceptional parents I know, have been reported to Child Protection for issues that are absolutely unfair, because neighbors judge the relationship of these women, and they have gone through very difficult situations in their lives simply because they are two women with children. And so I have been motivated by these experiences to come here before you to fight for their rights and to make sure that we recognize their commitment to their children and their commitment to one another. Because my experience, Madam Chair and members of the committee, has been an incredibly positive experience, and I have learned immensely from these couples, and I want to make sure that they are protected under the law. Having said that, Madam Chair, my bill is quite simple. Senate File 1732, the substance of it is on page 2, line 2.5, which simply says that a marriage contracted between persons of the same sex shall be valid in this state only if the marriage was contracted in another state or territory of the United States. So simply, Madam Chair, what I am trying to propose to the committee is that we recognize a marriage that has been performed in another jurisdiction, even overseas. And this, in current practice, Madam Chair, a marriage that is performed in another jurisdiction or overseas is usually valid in any state in the United States, as long as the marriage was legal in the jurisdiction where it occurred. So in the state of Minnesota, to my knowledge, and this is a committee where I really wanted to have this conversation, and I would have very much appreciated to have members give me some feedback on this, there are no formal prerequisites to recognition of an out-of-state marriage in Minnesota. This is an issue that I want to bring to your attention, and the reason for why I want to pursue the recognition here in the state. it is clear in the United States that this specific legislation is in place in order to ensure uniformity in the recognition of marital status throughout the country, so that persons legally married according to the laws of one state will not be held to be living in adultery in another state. And this could take place in a very temporary measure, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Let's say that a couple that is legally married in another state comes and takes a vacation in Minnesota, for instance. It's a short period of time. And so the question begs to us as to why we will not be able to recognize their marriage in this state in this short period of time if anything will occur to any of the persons involved in this marriage. The other issue, Madam Chair and members of the committee, that I want to bring to your attention is the federal law affecting recognition of out-of-state marriage and the full faith and credit clause of the federal Constitution and the federal law known as the Defense of Marriage Act. Both potentially affects the state's recognition of out-of-state marriages. So the full faith and credit clause of the United States, as Madam Chair and members know very well, is given to the state for public acts, records, and judicial proceedings in every other state. And the Congress may, by general laws, prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved in the effect thereof. So, Madam Chair, what I am trying to present to you today is that I believe that if we were to entertain a legal argument, one could argue before the committee that Minnesota is really prepared to adopt this particular clause, this particular bill that I am proposing to recognize the marriage of same-sex couples in the state of Minnesota today. So I thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to present this bill before your committee.
Thank you, Senator Torres-Ray. Any questions for Senator Torres-Ray on Senate File 1732? Members, you're more than welcome to join us here at the table if you would like. We have a series of testifiers who are going to be coming up. And I thought the way we could expedite it, and you're welcome to interact and ask questions if you'd like to. So I'd like you to come join us, and then I'm going to invite the testifiers to come, and maybe if we can maximize the number of people at the table. So we've got 3 seats. So let's see. We'll have Mr. Dan Kelly, Pastor Brock, and Father Becker. Mr. Kelly, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening. My name is Daniel J. Kelly. Madam Chair, members of the committee, and other distinguished guests, thank you for the opportunity to testify on Senate Files 1732, 120, and 1210. My testimony represents my professional knowledge and opinion as an attorney who has undertaken a study of the subjects of marriage and family. By way of background, I was a member of the first graduating class of Ave Maria School of Law, then located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I served as the first editor-in-chief of the Ave Maria Law Review. I subsequently clerked for Judge Ray Grunder on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit, and I am now in private practice. My testimony today represents my own views and is not intended to represent the views of my employer or any other organization or person. At the risk of stating the obvious, these bills touch on emotionally charged issues. Questions of personal identity, morality, and religious belief and practice surround these policy questions, and it is all too easy to take offense at opposing arguments. Many call for an end to acts of violence and hatred, and I willingly join that chorus. But let us not pretend that this is a one-way street. In the wake of the vote on California's Prop 8, Mormons and Mormon churches suffered threats, violence, and vandalism as a result of outspoken and unpopular views, and my own church, the Roman Catholic Church, routinely suffers the slings and arrows of this debate. One other preliminary point that informs my views, and it is one that is routinely run over in these discussions, and it is that there is an important distinction between homosexual persons and extramarital sexual acts. Note that I do not say homosexual acts because many moral or religious objections are really about extramarital sexual acts. They're not particular to or a particular affliction of homosexual persons. Often the moral objection to extramarital sexual acts and circumstances that encourage them is conflated with an objection to homosexual persons when discussing same-sex marriage, and this is not the case for me. My arguments are based upon objections to acts, not homosexual persons. Indeed, I have had the privilege of having many homosexual friends. So let me be clear, I believe that these bills, if enacted, would undermine the public understanding of the role of government in the institution of marriage, would set up a clash under the Free Exercise Clause of the Constitutions, and this would harm Minnesotans. Senate Files 120 and 1210 propose to abolish the legal definition of marriage as the union of one man and one woman and substitute a gender-neutral definition of marriage that would merely require the consent of any two unmarried adults who are not closely related by blood or adoption. And I note these bills propose to strike or modify consanguinity laws without regard to the reason why those consanguinity laws were in place in the first place. These are proposed to advance equality and fundamental fairness to our fellow citizens, but this does not require that we treat relationships that are fundamentally different as if they were the same, nor does fairness require that we expand government's role in our private lives or that we undermine the very purpose for which government regulates heterosexual relationship. The central issue, to be quite candid, is procreation. The simple fact is that two men or two women are incapable of creating a child through their sexual unions. While sexual acts between same-sex partners may create a sense of intimacy and commitment, they do not create children. This is the fundamental difference between sexual acts in homosexual unions and those between heterosexuals, usually regardless of the intent of the couple. Because this has the possibility to create new life, it is true that every act of sexual intercourse does not necessarily create new life, and many heterosexual couples use contraception. But the fact remains that pregnancy can occur regardless of whether the couple uses contraception. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control remind us that more than half the pregnancies in this country are unintended. Unintended does not mean unwanted, but it does mean that the use of contraception is no guarantee that sex will not result in pregnancy. When pregnancy results, you can generally identify the mother. Identifying the father is much more difficult, and it has been proven difficult in welfare laws. Many single mothers are unable to identify or reluctant to identify the fathers of their children. Marriage tends to avoid these problems in the vast majority of cases. It allows a man and a woman to declare their intention to engage in marital intercourse and raise children. In fact, Minnesota laws condition marriage in part upon the physical capacity to consummate the marriage by sexual intercourse. Touching back on my earlier point about extramarital sexual acts, I note that adultery is still a crime. It also should be noted that a man publicly assumes legal responsibility for any child born to his wife during the marriage or 280 days thereafter. Candidly, we're in the throes of the final stages of an erosion process that began some 100 years ago. There used to be laws outlawing the sale of artificial contraceptives, and I could testify at length about the harm no-fault divorce laws have caused to erode marriage. One of the enormous consequences of enacting these bills as law is that we would be on track for an enormous collision between public accommodation of these unions and religious liberty. Thanks to the Supreme Court case of Oregon v. Smith, those defending free exercise are losing on a regular basis and have been for a decade. There are 8 points I will make quickly and just give you the names of some cases that have already been litigated. Number one, public resources will be used to promote the moral equivalency of same-sex unions and marriages between a man and a woman. Books will be published in public schools and taught. Case on point is Parker v. Hurley in Massachusetts. 2, public officials will deny public funds and access to facilities and programs to those who disagree. Case on point, numerous ones involving the Boy Scouts. 3, churches and religiously affiliated organizations will be denied tax-exempt status. Case on point, Ocean Grove versus Papaleo out of New Jersey. 4, public employees will be disciplined, demoted, and even fired for their refusal to recognize same-sex unions. Case on point is Dixon versus the University of Toledo. 5, most drastically, private businesses will be fined for refusing to recognize same-sex unions as marriages. Willock versus Elaine Photography in New Mexico. Incidentally, this case was recently ruled on by New Mexico District Court in December, and the ruling amounts to forced speech. A photographer is forced to photograph same-sex commitment ceremonies. 6, private colleges and universities will be forced to house same-sex couples in married student housing. Case on point is Levin versus Yeshiva University. 7, students will be refused admission or expelled from professional programs, and licensed professionals will be forced into re-education programs or subject to professional discipline. Case on point, Ward versus Wilbanks. And finally, private universities may lose their accreditation because they uphold the beliefs of their religious supporters. This has been threatened in 2001 by the American Psychological Association. In short, these 8 points illustrate that the argument that how does this affect me is specious. It affects all of us, especially those who hold unpopular religious views. Of course, there are loving, committed relationships between same-sex couples, but civil marriage is principally about ensuring the well-being of children. We can and should make other compassionate legal arrangements available to take care of the diversity of human relationships we find in our state and indeed in the world, but we should not do at the expense of the institution of marriage. Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me the time to appear before this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Pastor Brock.
My name is Tom Brock. I'm pastor at Hope Lutheran Church in Minneapolis, and I would give voice today to the overwhelming majority of Christian churches in the United States, Catholic, Orthodox, Evangelical, Protestant, and the church throughout the world in affirming marriage as one man, one woman. The small minority of churches which have deviated from this overwhelming consensus are in shrinking churches like the Episcopal Church, the United Church of Christ, and now the ELCA Lutheran Church, where people are leaving in large numbers. Indeed, historically, the entire Christian tradition upholds marriage as one man, one woman. The reason Christian tradition holds to this view is because its founder, Jesus Christ, taught and held this view of marriage, and he is the final authority for Christians. In Matthew 19, Jesus roots his view of marriage in the creation accounts of Genesis 1 and 2, and in the structural complementarity of the two sexes. From creation onward, the biblical narrative stream of the Old and New Testaments holds to heterosexual norm for marriage. In the New Testament book of Ephesians, for example, chapter 5, the Apostle Paul follows Jesus in affirming the creation accounts and the heterosexual norm when giving his teaching on marriage and family. The Apostle Paul sees man-woman marriage as symbolic of the union of Christ and his church. And you don't have to be a Christian to believe that marriage is a man and a woman. Atheist China, formerly atheist Russia, don't have homosexual marriage, and their governments are based on atheism. So why have virtually all cultures, Christian or not, held to natural marriage? Natural marriage has existed without exception in all human civilizations as socially encouraged institutions because they uniquely bring together the two parts of humanity, male and female, in cooperative sexual and domestic relationship. As such, natural marriage is not at root a political issue or a matter of human rights or a distinctively Christian or religious issue. Natural marriage is a human institution. As such, we find natural marriage in all human cultures at all times for the very reason that the God who created us has so wired mankind that we need this created order to exist. It is no surprise, then, that there are few matters of such fundamental importance to the well-being of human society than natural male-female marriage. Natural marriage serves the common social good in all human civilizations in at least the following ways. Number one, Natural marriage regulates sexuality by keeping it confined to permanent and exclusive man-woman relationships. As anthropologist Margaret Mead noted, every culture has the need to civilize its male population through natural marriage. Secondly, natural marriage socializes men by channeling their sexual and masculine energy in community-building ways. One of the most important social roles women play is getting men to behave by channeling their passions and work behaviors in socially productive ways. Third reason for natural marriage, it protects women from being exploited by men. Monogamous natural marriage socializes men by giving women socially enforced and exclusive legal claims on men. History shows it is important for men also to permanently link themselves to women. And number 4, most importantly, natural marriage ensures that children grow up with biologically connected mothers and fathers. Children do best with a mother and a father. Mommies do not make good daddies, and daddies do not make good mommies, and children deserve both. The two sexes are different to the core, and each is necessary culturally and biologically for the optimal development of a human being. Social research strongly indicates that children with a married mother and father consistently do better in every measure of well-being than their peers in any other type of family relationship. Same-sex marriage, on the other hand, is incapable of benefiting society in these ways. Natural marriage, then, is extremely relevant to the content of our civil laws. We need to protect and promote natural marriage. In closing, these reasons we agree with Paul Nathanson, homosexual professor at McGill University, who believes that same-sex marriage is not a good idea. Nathanson writes, because heterosexual bonding is directly related to both reproduction and survival, and because it involves much, much more than copulation, every human society has had to encourage heterosexual bonding actively. Heterosexual bonding is always encouraged by a cultural norm, in other words, not merely allowed as one of many lifestyle choices. Thank you.
Questions for Pastor Brock? Father Becker.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senators and Father Michael Becker. I'm at the St. John Vianney College Seminary at the University of St. Thomas, and I'm here speaking on my own behalf, but also the bishops, Catholic bishops of the state of Minnesota, who are very much in opposition to the present files brought forward, 1732, 120, and 1210, which attempt to define same-sex unions as equivalent to marriage. As stated many times before, the Minnesota Catholic bishops oppose any and all such legislation or any judicial attempts to accord same-sex unions the equivalent status and rights of marriage by referencing them as marriage, civil unions, or the like. As Pastor Brock said, and I would concur, the churches teach by faith, the Christian churches and natural law too, that marriage is meant to be a faithful and exclusive lifelong union between man and a woman, one man and one woman. They are joined in an intimate community of life and love, and that is a basic foundation point, a basic institution in our culture. It's a foundation block upon which a healthy culture is built. And if we erode this culture, these building blocks, society will suffer even more, as it already is. In heterosexual unions, two people can give themselves to each other fully as a total self-gift, simultaneously offered and received. That is impossible in any homosexual act. If we look at any homosexual act individually, we see that there can be no giving and receiving on an equal basis. Pleasure is put supreme above personhood and dignity. Pleasure supreme, dignity becomes second. And we must protect the dignity of individual persons. The Catholic Church definitely wants to protect the dignity of all. If you were to choose to put into law the legalization of same-sex marriage, you should study the facts of what same-sex does. What are the acts and what are the effects of the acts? Okay, there's a kind of degradation in, especially, for example, the male homosexual act. I learned when I was 25 that this anal sex results in ulcers and fissures with semen entering bloodstream, gastrointestinal diseases. If you legalize marriage, you are not just telling the public we're in favor of economic justice so people can have benefits, inheritance rights, visits to hospital. You are not doing that solely. You would be acting as teachers of the public, and you would be teaching them that these acts are good, healthy, and that people should freely enter into them. To say that my marriage is not affected by that is just like 1/2 or 1/4 of the issue. There's a whole other issue. What will be taught in the schools to our children? What will they learn? And what will they experiment with? So if you want to act as teachers saying that all these homosexual acts are right and good, that they're not harmful, that they're not debasing, that they do not harm the dignity of persons, then in a measure you would be responsible for that too. So the bishops would like to say that the beauty of marriage between one man and one woman is a gift from God from the dawn of creation, something that should be valued, supremely understood as fundamental building block of our culture. The male and female are complementary to each other. They're able to give life, the fruition of love, and that must be celebrated. Domestic partnerships can't do that at all. They can't do that at all. Neither church nor state can alter the basic meaning and structure of marriage. Marriage, whose nature and purposes are established by God, can only be the union of a man and a woman and must remain as such in law. In manner unlike any other relationship, marriage makes a unique and irreplaceable contribution to the common good of society, especially through procreation and the education of children. The union of husband and wife becomes over a lifetime a great good for themselves, their family, their communities, our society. Marriage is a gift to be cherished and protected. Though it is regulated by civil laws and church laws, marriage did not originate from either the church or the state, but came from God. Thank you for listening, Madam Chair and Senators.
So our next testifiers are not ministers, and I guess while I have you at the table, I just want to, I thank you for coming to testify, but I'm just a little bit concerned that it seems like your definition of marriage is not necessarily true to what I understand from the Bible, because the definition of marriage is exclusively between one man and one woman is not the tradition of the basis of the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? I mean, it didn't emerge from that. In fact, I think both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, you may have one man, but there are oftentimes multiple women in those marriages. So I guess I'm asking for clarification on that strict definition of one man, one woman.
The Old Testament is true, Madam Chair. The Old Testament accepted more than one wife per husband, but the New Testament does not. Jesus Christ clearly states that the two shall become one flesh. Man shall leave, wife shall leave family, and the two shall become one flesh. He also speaks against divorce, that from time again they were intended to be one perpetually. So the New Testament, in fact, does teach that marriage is between one man and one woman in a lifelong union.
I think you could say, too, there's prescriptive scripture and descriptive scripture. Prescriptive is what God says, do this, don't do that. Descriptive says it's happening, but it never says God likes it. The Bible describes lots of behaviors, one of which is polygamy. It never says God likes it. In fact, God made Adam and Eve. He didn't make Adam and 5 women. From the beginning, it's one man, one woman. Yes, there were aberrations, and they were not good. The ideal in the Old and New Testament is one man, one woman.
Any other questions for our witnesses? Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since I have 2 representatives of clergy in front of me, maybe you can answer a question. I keep hearing that since New Testament was written, things have changed. That other clergy makes references that things have changed in the New Testament, and that the references of the Old no longer apply. Now, that isn't what I'm taught in my church, but nevertheless, that is a statement that is used to justify a new world that recognizes homosexual relationships as well as marriage. Do you have any reference in your study of the New Testament where that has relaxed the standard as it was found in the Old Testament?
Father Becker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, the Old Testament, Christianity teaches that the Old Testament must be understood in light of the New Testament, and not vice versa exactly, that the New Testament is the fullness of revelation. Jesus Christ came and gave us the fullness of revelation and the fullness of understanding. So when we look at the Old Testament, in a way, it's a preparatory period for a greater outpouring. And to say that some things in the Old Testament were that way and they should be equatable to the New Testament is not true. For example, Moses allowed divorce in the Old Testament, and Jesus says in the New Testament, he allowed that because of the hardness of your hearts, but from the dawn of creation, it was meant to be that man and woman should be one in a lifelong marriage. So Jesus himself does interpret laws more strictly than they are in the Old Testament. Another one on adultery. Jesus says, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, if you have lusted in your heart, you have committed adultery. So he actually, if you will, narrows the field and offers a beautiful narrow gate from which to enter, which is a fuller understanding of what it means to live for God. So the Old Testament is not exactly equal in all issues to the New.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. You may leave.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Dr. Harley and Ms. Boynes. Welcome to the committee. As you begin, please state your name for the record.
Who would you like to?
Dr. Harley.
All right, I will begin. Thank you, Madam Chairman, committee, for the opportunity to testify this evening in opposition to Senate Bills 120, 1210, and 1732. I've been a licensed clinical psychologist in Minnesota for 34 years, as long as Minnesota has licensed psychologists. At one time, I operated the largest mental health system in Minnesota with clinics in 32 different Minnesota cities. I personally treated or supervised the treatment of over 50,000 Minnesota residents. It's been argued by some who advocate same-sex marriage or civil unions that they are born with a predisposition for same-sex attraction. Many feel that a same-sex marriage is their only opportunity to experience the kind of relationship that those born with an opposite sex attraction experience. But my experience as a psychologist has proven to me that sexual orientation is not determined by birth, but rather by choice. Over my 34 years of experience, I've counseled hundreds of people who were involved in gay and lesbian relationships, as well as many others who had a very wide assortment of sexual preferences that had led them to my clinics. Some of their sexual practices were legal and some were illegal. But in all cases, their sexual preference had created a dysfunctional outcome, and they wanted it to change. The counselors in my clinics and I helped these people change their sexual preferences that ultimately led them to a functional lifestyle. Our clinics and many others throughout the United States have proven that it's possible for same-sex oriented people to become opposite-sex oriented people. And it's also possible for opposite-sex oriented people to become same-sex oriented, if they would like to make that change. In fact, most of us can become sexually attracted to almost anything or anybody under certain conditions. Given a positive sexual experience, people find that they can respond sexually to a host of different people and objects. Many who have sexual preferences many who have sexual preferences that have led them to a dysfunctional lifestyle feel that they can't help themselves, They feel trapped in a brain that gives them no choice but to participate in their dysfunctional way of life. But my experience counseling these people and the experiences of many others in my profession prove that's not the case. The majority of those treated at our clinic for unwanted sexual preferences made successful recoveries. By changing their sexual preferences, they developed a lifestyle that was functional and successful for them. That's why I'm so concerned about educational programs that teach children that we are born to be either same-sex oriented or opposite-sex oriented. In those early years when children are very impressionable, they may be influenced to believe that they are gay or lesbian simply because they experience some same-sex interest. Quite frankly, many children at one time or another will find themselves sexually aroused by members of their own sex. If, as a result, they begin to focus their sexual attention on those of the same sex and create skills that make same-sex relationships ever more satisfying, it's easy for them to think that they were born to be gay or lesbian. The truth is that we're all capable of expressing our sexuality in ways we haven't even considered yet. And we can choose to change our sexual orientation by eliminating unwanted sources of sexual pleasure and encouraging a preferred source. While many came to my clinic wanting their sexual preference to change from same-sex attraction to opposite-sex attraction, in all my years of experience, not a single individual ever wanted to change from opposite-sex attraction to same-sex attraction. That's because almost everyone knows that the lifestyle created by same-sex attraction tends to be much more difficult than one created by opposite-sex attraction. Those who work in the trenches, who have daily contact with same-sex couples, know firsthand about the challenges that many of these couples face. They know about their health issues. They know how fragile these relationships are and how much of their depression is caused by their unfaithfulness to each other. They know about the high rate of suicide and high incidence of violence. These facts of life are not readily publicized because it's often considered a betrayal to accurately describe the pain and suffering that the same-sex lifestyle creates. But my own personal experience and my experience with those who counsel those in the same-sex community have led me to the conclusion that if a person changes from a same-sex to an opposite-sex orientation, their lifestyle tends to be healthier, happier, and much more stable. I am testifying regarding my own personal experience with this issue, but I encourage you to also follow statistics that are available regarding same-sex marriages and civil unions. How are they turning out? In one Swedish study I've read, the divorce rate of same-sex couples was compared with the divorce rate of opposite-sex couples over a period of 9 years. It was found that same-sex male couples were 50% more likely to divorce, and same-sex female couples were 167% more likely to divorce than their opposite-sex counterparts. These results are particularly impressive when you consider that same-sex couples in the most stable relationships would be the first to take advantage of the opportunity to marry. The results from Sweden should give same-sex couples a temporary advantage over their opposite-sex counterparts. But these results indicate what I already knew. On average, same-sex relationships are much less stable than opposite-sex relationships. If that's true, it should be obvious that a change of sexual orientation would benefit those who find themselves attracted to those of the same sex. But a change of sexual orientation would not only benefit adults, they would also benefit children raised by those adults. Children need parents who stay together. In spite of the high divorce rate we witness among those who are opposite sex oriented, same-sex partners appear to have an even higher rate of dissolution. If same-sex preferences lead to lifestyles that are not as functional and successful as opposite-sex preferences, the government should, if anything, encourage a change of same-sex preference rather than encourage a dysfunctional lifestyle. And it's certainly not unprecedented for government to encourage one sexually based lifestyle over another. There are many examples of those lifestyles that the government has rightfully discouraged, even though there are many who feel that they have a right to participate in them. A relationship with multiple partners comes to mind, as you mentioned. While we have outlawed it in our society, it's found throughout the world and throughout history. Many of those who practice polygamy describe their deep feelings of love and attachment. They can also point to examples of happy and successful children who are raised in that culture. If the argument used by those favoring same-sex marriage are accepted, we will soon be asked to approve the marriage of a host of other alternative relationships that are now legal in many parts of the world. It's instructive to note that where same-sex marriage has been legalized in America, there is already a growing effort to recognize polygamous relationships, which offer many, if not more, examples of personal fulfillment. To summarize, in case after case, I've seen people experience a successful transition from sexual preferences that lead to dysfunctional lifestyles to sexual preferences that lead to functional lifestyles. It happens every day, every hour of every day, throughout America. My second point was that it's also been my experience that same-sex relationships tend not to be as functional and gratifying as opposite-sex relationships. I've observed hundreds of same-sex oriented people in my own professional experience, and they have stood out to me as being characteristically frustrated and depressed, many to the point of suicide. Their relationships tend to be brief, very unhealthy, and violent. Granted, I've seen my share of unhappy opposite-sex relationships as well. Yet on average, the same-sex relationships I've witnessed have been far more dysfunctional. Finally, the basic argument used in support of same-sex marriage and civil unions also apply to a host of other relationships, especially polygamy, that have long been outlawed in America for very good reasons. Why would the government want to encourage those alternative relationships when we already have irrefutable evidence that both children and adults thrive best in a marriage of one man and one woman who love each other? Thank you again for your attention to this issue.
Dr. Hartley, your practice, do you practice, is it a general practice, or do you focus exclusively on same-sex orientation people who want to become opposite-sex orientation people?
Most of my experience with same-sex oriented people happened prior to 1993, although I've had some experience since then. That's when I closed all of the clinics I had in Minnesota. Since then, I have been focusing my attention mostly in writing. I have written 16 books on marital relationships, and I conduct seminars, and I have a website. But since 1993, my experience has not been with day-to-day, face-to-face counseling. But what I'm reporting to you is the experience of my lifetime.
But Dr. Hartley, in your lifetime experience, though, that is part of your specialty, is to counsel?
Relationships. I have focused. I am a clinical psychologist, which means that I am licensed to diagnose and treat all mental disorders. And I have dealt with emotional disorders of every form you could possibly imagine. However, my specialty has been on the development of relationships because they have so much to do with emotional disorders. And they are reflected so much in emotional disorders. And so I've devoted the remainder of my life to helping people in marital relationships to stay together, to take good care of their children, and to learn to adjust better to each other.
Well, you speak with so much expertise about same-sex orientations who want to convert or turn to opposite sex orientation. I was trying to get to sort of the root of where the expertise came from.
It was primarily my experience having dealt with this population that would come to my clinic, although most of what I know about same-sex relationships have been with other counselors that I have been in contact with that dealt specifically with them, and they are almost unanimous in their opinion that this is a type of relationship that causes these people a great deal of trouble. If we knew how to change their sexual orientation to heterosexual interest, they would be a lot happier. We proved in our clinic that we could do that in literally hundreds of cases.
Ms. Boynes, welcome to the committee. Please restate your name for the record.
My name is Janet Boynes. Let me briefly share my personal story with you and why I feel it's important to uphold the traditional definition of marriage as between one man and one woman. I am single and never been married. I grew up in a non-traditional family, a family that had a very negative impact on me and my brothers and sisters. Instead of one father, we had four. As a result of my dysfunctional family arrangements and the problems that ensue, I turned to homosexuality and entered the lesbian lifestyle. For 14 years, I lived as a lesbian. As one time, my lesbian partner and I decided we wanted to be a real family and have children, kids who would then have two mommies. After all, if one is good, two is better, right? Wrong. I am so thankful that we did not go through with the plan and perpetuate another dysfunctional family. Children need one mother and one father. Homosexuality is not immutable. I am living proof that homosexuals can change from gay to straight. Those who say that homosexuality is not a choice and believe homosexuals are born that way have no scientific authority to base that on. There is no gay gene. The color of one's skin is immutable, unchangeable characteristics. I cannot change from black to white. I did, however, change from gay to straight. Thousands of ex-gays prove this is true as well. I have now been out of the lesbian lifestyle for 11 years. I look forward to being married someday to a man. When we tamper with the plan for civilization that for the millennia has protected children and established sound families, we're headed down a destructive path to the individual and to society. For example, homosexual and lesbians, sex is very unhealthy. By legalizing homosexual marriage, you are supporting and encouraging behavior that scientific evidence shows makes people sick, often incurable and fatal. I saw this born out of the lives of many of my friends while I was living a lesbian lifestyle. Do not be fooled by the unscientific ideology of homosexual activists who attempts to portray the homosexual lifestyle as normal and healthy and insist that homosexual relationships are the equivalent every way to their heterosexual counterparts. The vast majority of medical studies show that the reality is quite the opposite. To the contrary, science reports that the most deadly and sexual transmitted disease are highly among gay men. The human rectum wasn't made for sexual behavior. The human lining of the rectum easily tears. That's why presence of such STDs, HPV, gonorrhea, syphilis, gay bowel syndrome, and HIV are far greater in homosexual relationships. I know that because my brother died of AIDS. This is because of the sexual behavior and practices. To believe otherwise is a denial ideology, not fact. Studies also show that the average homosexual has dozens of sexual partners in his lifetime. I repeat, dozens. I know, I had them. Scientific studies also report that even in homosexual relationships in which the partners consider themselves to be committed relationships, promiscuity is the rule rather than the exception. Last, even monogamous homosexual relations, risky behaviors like anal intercourse and oral anal intercourse is higher than those without a steady partner. I am also concerned about children. Some children that all children need two loving people in a committed relationship, In my experience, this is simply not true. We have tried this in my community and found to be wrought with failure. For decades, we have tried to raise our sons with two loving people, a mother and a grandmother. And we know it didn't work. But is anyone listening? There is a mountain of sociological data that proves children are far better off in a home with a mother and a father, not just two committed people in a loving relationship. Let me tell you something. A same-sex marriage is an environment without a mother or a father. And here in African American community, we already know what will happen. But what I do here are a comparison between same-sex marriages and equality, civil rights, and discrimination. I am deeply saddened that people would accuse me of discrimination because I believe a child needs a mother and a father. Some have said that the laws precluded same-sex marriage are like laws once banning interracial marriages. Same-sex marriage and interracial marriage have nothing in common. There is no difference between a black person and a white person other than their skin color. But there is tremendous difference between a man and a woman. Allowing a black woman and a white man to marry does not change the definition of marriage. However, allowing two men and two women to marry would fundamentally change the definition. Maintaining the definition of marriage as the union of one man and one woman is essential to preserving the very nature and purpose of marriage. In closing, I encourage you to separate fact from fiction and science from ideology. There is a mountain of scientific, psychological, and sociological data that shows homosexual sex is unhealthy and that children need both a mother and a father, not two mothers and not two fathers. By legalizing homosexual marriage, you are deliberately putting children in an unhealthy environment and affirming unhealthy sexual behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boynes. I find your testimony to be interesting because it's good to have somebody who have had the experience that you've had be here to speak to us. And I think our next group of testifiers are going to come up and talk about their own experiences being in the same environment, which I think is so different from the one that you've described. And so it's good to have your words here. I was struck as you were describing the relationships, and I guess I was thinking that all along in these bills, I don't see the words anal or any of the words that you used in your testimony, and yet it seems that the group of testifiers who, among your colleagues who've been up to the table to testify against these bills for the last half hour are so fixated on the sex-making aspect of these bills when in essence they're not explicit. I mean, these bills are so careful to carve out the respect and sanctity for marriage, and in fact that's what the words say. And yet all the testifiers who've been at the table are so focused on the sex-making aspect of it, and which I find to be very contrary to what the intent of the bills is, to really celebrate the sanctity of the marriage. And that's why the bills are fighting so hard for it, is to say it's a wonderful thing, and if it's going to be available, then it ought to be available to all of us, and don't keep us out. And so it seems that the fixation and the focus and the sex act in the way that you've all presented, it just seems so contrary to the spirit of what the bills are trying to go, which seem to be so explicitly away from the focus on those the sex acts, and to really focus on the sanctity of the marriage. So I find it really your testimony to be very interesting, but a good contrast to the rest of the other testifiers. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
If we could have Mr. Carpenter, Ms. Swanson, and let's see, these are in groups. So, well, let's take those two, and then we'll go down the line. Mr. Carpenter, welcome to the committee. Did you
Thank
go
you.
skiing in Vancouver?
I was disqualified from the Olympics because of my injury, so I was able to come here today. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and members of the committee for hearing from us today on these three bills. I want to speak generally to them. First of all, let me identify myself. I am Dale Carpenter. I'm the Earl R. Larson Professor of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Law at the University of Minnesota Law School, where I teach constitutional law, the First Amendment, including freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and sexual orientation and the law. So in some ways, the matters before the committee intersect with all of the areas that I have a great deal of interest in. I am also a lifelong Republican and a conservative. And I want to assure the members of the committee that I have already come out as a Republican at the law school, where my colleagues have been very understanding and accepting, although some have suggested counseling and conversion therapy. And it's because I'm a conservative that I support the recognition of same-sex marriage in the state of Minnesota. It's good for stable relationships, it is good for families, and it is good for children. So I'd like to do three basic things in the next few minutes. One is describe the importance of the issue before the committee. Second, discuss some of the trends I see in public policy around the country and around the world. And then third, talk about some effects that we are seeing from these trends. First of all, the importance of this as an issue, as something this committee should consider. There are about 9 million gay people in the United States. That is using the most conservative data that we can use, the most conservative numbers of about 3% of the U.S. population. Translated into the population of Minnesota, that is about 150,000 gays and lesbians. According to the 2000 census, there are over 9,000 same-sex couple-headed households in the state of Minnesota. Now, these are things that the government did not even begin to count until about 20 years ago. These are statistics and trends that we are really just now learning about with a great deal of detail. It is a lot of people, when you think about it, Madam Chairman, who will never have the prospect of marriage in their lives. It denies to them the most important and powerful social and legal institution that we have for encouraging values like monogamy, stability, and commitment, the kinds of things that Father Becker talked about and that Dr. Harley talked about that are so important. If the main concern of conservative social theory is with promiscuity and sexually transmitted diseases, it is hardly obvious that the answer should be to deny this class of people the ability to marry, to deny them the opportunity to channel their sexual energies into this traditionalizing and conservatizing institution. Now consider that according to the 2000 census, again, about 20% of the male couple households in this country and about a third of the female couple households in this country are raising children. And of course, a lot of kids in this country are being raised by gay and lesbian parents who are single, yet have no prospect of marriage in their future. There have been discussions of mountains of social science data and other evidence to support various theories. But the fact is, every major social science study of children raised in gay and lesbian households shows them to be just as well off, just as well adjusted as children raised in opposite sex households. In a review of 21 studies of parenting by same-sex couples, the sociologists Judith Stacy and Timothy Bablars concluded that, quote, every relevant study to date shows that parental sexual orientation per se has no measurable effect on the quality of parent-child relationships or on children's mental health or social adjustment, unquote. Now, I agree with those who say we need more and better and bigger and more longer studies on this issue. But the studies to date show at least this much. They support a strong provisional government, that same-sex couples are competent to raise children, that children can be trusted in these households. They're doing a good job. Not one study shows that gay and lesbian couples are not good parents. But you don't have to take my word for it, and you don't have to take the word of the researchers who have studied this phenomenon to date. The idea that gays and lesbians can and should be raising children is endorsed in the public policy of every state in this country, and in fact is endorsed in the public policy of the state of Minnesota, where gay and lesbian couples may raise their own children, use assisted reproduction, serve as long-term foster parents, and legally adopt children. In fact, some courts in this state have allowed second parent adoptions where both of the people in same-sex relationships may serve as the legal parents of the child. Now, a lot of people of goodwill believe, I think quite reasonably, that on average, at least, the best thing for kids is to be raised by their own biological mothers and fathers living in a low-conflict marriage. That was the position taken by Pastor Brock and some of the others who testified here today. They may well be correct about that, but even if they are correct, it has nothing to do with the question of whether the state should recognize same-sex marriages. Same-sex marriage in the state of Minnesota will not take one single child away from a biological mother and father who want to raise that child and are capable of doing so. No serious person, and certainly none of the people who have testified earlier here tonight, advocate removing children from the homes of their gay and lesbian parents. So whether or not same-sex marriage is recognized in this state, children by the thousands will continue to be raised by gay parents. The only question on this table when it comes to the welfare of children, then, is whether these children will be raised in homes that enjoy the protections and benefits that marriage would provide to their families. Conservative social theory would say that it is certainly better for children to be raised by married opposite-sex couples than by unmarried opposite-sex couples. So it stands to reason that it would surely be better for children to be raised by married same-sex couples than by unmarried same-sex couples. That's some of what I regard as the importance of the issue before the committee. Let me talk for a moment about what I see as some trends in public policy. We now have fully recognized same-sex marriage in the states of New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, and just to the south in Iowa. We will have it soon, within the next week, in Washington, D.C. Several states are now recognizing same-sex marriages from out of state, including the state of New York. Same-sex marriage is also recognized in Belgium, Canada, the Netherlands, Norway, South Africa, Spain, and Sweden. It will become the law of the land in Portugal later this year. These are countries with cultural, legal, and political heritages similar to our own. In addition to the states recognizing same-sex marriage, there is also broad recognition of same-sex relationships in California, New Jersey, Oregon, Washington, and Nevada, and more limited recognition in Colorado, Maryland, Wisconsin, Maine, and Hawaii. All of that has happened over the past 20 years or so. While it would have been possible to come before this committee 2 decades ago and argue about unsupported theories and hopes and fears, make unsupported claims, and introduce a variety of hypotheticals and a parade of horribles. It is no longer entirely possible to do that without dealing with the evidence. With several countries now recognizing same-sex marriages, and with almost a quarter of the population of the United States living in states with either same-sex marriage or with some other form of relationship recognition, the period of abstract debate, divorced from fact, is coming to an end. It is becoming a debate about facts. So what are the effects that we can see? Well, I want to talk about what has not happened and then briefly about what has happened. First, what has not happened. There have been no negative effects on heterosexual families or children raised in those families. Heterosexuals continue to procreate, despite the fact that same-sex couples in their countries or jurisdictions can marry. Religious freedom is still alive and well, despite dire predictions to the contrary. Priests have not been required to perform or officiate at same-sex marriages. Churches have not been required to recognize them or to change their doctrine. Religious schools and institutions have not lost federal or state funding or their tax-exempt status. Now, I know earlier this evening Mr. Kelly cited several cases in which there was a conflict between same-sex couples or gay and lesbian individuals and those who dissent religiously. What all of those cases show is that there are occasionally conflicts between anti-discrimination law and religious dissenters on these issues. What all of them show is that there are times when the religious claimants, the claimants for objections, lose, and there are times when they win. Some of the cases are still being litigated. What those cases do not show is that same-sex marriage is creating some inevitable conflict with religious liberty. None of the cases cited by Mr. Kelly involve a jurisdiction in which same-sex marriage was recognized, and indeed many of them, including the infamous New Mexico photographer case, involve states where there is no recognition or was no recognition of same-sex relationships at the time. And in fact, it would be impossible or very difficult for public policy in this country or in this state to track religious doctrine. I think that was very well evidenced in the testimony by Father Becker, who noted, I think with very admirable candor, that his own religious tradition opposes divorce. Yet we are not going back to a situation in the public policy in this state where divorces are not permitted. We're not going back to that. And so public policy does diverge from religious tradition in a number of ways. It would be difficult to run a religiously pluralistic society and try to track religious doctrine on this, certainly on the question of marriage. 20 years after recognizing same-sex relationships in Scandinavia and in other European countries, there are higher marriage rates for heterosexuals, lower divorce rates, lower rates for out-of-wedlock births, lower sexually transmitted disease rates, and no slippery slope to polygamy or to anything else. Now, Dr. Harley cited a study that he said came from Sweden and measured the divorce rates for same-sex marriages over a period of 9 years. I would very much like to see the study of same-sex marriage divorce rates in Sweden over the past 9 years, since Sweden began recognizing same-sex marriages in 2008. So that is what has not happened. What has happened? Well, a lot more couples, families, and kids are protected under the law in places where same-sex marriages are recognized. And these families are not abstractions. These are not people who just happen to live under the same roof. Gay families are part of the lived experience of this country and this state. They are doing the hard work of contributing to their communities, paying their taxes, obeying the law, and raising the next generation. Yet the public policy of this state acts as if these families are literally worthless, that they serve no useful function, even as more and more kids are placed in the homes of gay and lesbian people and with same-sex couples. We expect those couples and those individuals to do the hard work of sustaining their relationships and raising their kids, and they have a right to expect that in return we support them. Minds are beginning to change on this issue, including, I should say, among Republicans. In Massachusetts, State Senator Brian Lees, who was a Republican who served as the state Senate minority leader, co-sponsored a state constitutional amendment that would have banned same-sex marriage in the state shortly after the Massachusetts court recognized it. But after more than a year of gay marriage in his state, recognition of gay marriage in his state, he changed his mind and opposed the amendment that he had previously sponsored. Why? Well, this is what he told the New York Times. Quote, "Gay marriage has begun, and life has not changed for the citizens of the Commonwealth, with the exception of those who can now marry, who could not before." Let me conclude with a couple of thoughts, Madam Chairman. There is a lot of cynicism in our culture about marriage. And it sometimes seems to me, as I've gone around and talked about this issue, that same-sex couples are practically the last people in this country who still actually believe in it. After all the jokes about marriage, after the cultural depreciation that it has suffered over the years, the campaign for same-sex marriage has these couples defending the institution as a powerful and positive force in the lives of individuals and families. The fact is, as a friend of mine once said, you can't make the case for same-sex marriage without making the case for marriage. That is what this movement is doing. Gay families are saying yes to a profoundly conservatizing and traditionalizing institution, and it's time for the state of Minnesota to take yes for an answer. Thank you very much. And Madam Chairman, I'd like to offer a booklet that OutFront Minnesota has prepared, a legislative handbook that cites some of the studies dealing with children and so forth that are relevant to this debate.
Thank you, Professor. Ms. Swanson. Oh, any questions for the professor? Ms. Swanson, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the committee. I appreciate your time this evening. I know you guys are facing some challenges in what's going on, so I really appreciate you taking the time to listen tonight. I am here to talk about my personal story and just share a little background. I have a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology with a double major in behavioral genetics, but I'm not here to talk as a professional. I'm here to talk as a mom. I happen to have 2 gay kids who are fabulous, fabulous kids. And when I was asked to come and talk about my kids, I was like, you got to be kidding me. I get to come and talk about my 2 beautiful, wonderful daughters. They were raised by a great family of grandparents and a mom and dad. They went to a Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and one even went to a Jesuit Catholic college. We lived in St. Paul our whole life. In fact, I lived 6 blocks away from where I grew up. And I'll talk a little bit about my daughters. My oldest, Jessica, is out in Seattle. She is a physician. She graduated from the University of Minnesota Medical School. Her clients are mostly homeless individuals. She works for a community health center, and she acts as psychiatrist, addiction coach, social worker, and counselor, and physician. I'm trying to get her back to Minnesota, but we'll see. If we pass this marriage equality law, I think I have some more clout, so I really appreciate your focus on that. My other daughter, Bridget, who is here this evening, is just an incredible woman. She is director of a national nonprofit and has been an invited speaker at a lot of different advocacy groups, including the Lance Armstrong Cancer Foundation, as well as Girls Rock the Capitol last week. So I have to say, I am incredibly proud of my kids. What can I say? They do good work. They make an impact. And so I'm here to ask for your support to help make them be not second-class citizens, to help them have the recognition that I have, that I can be married. I've heard the testimony from the other side, and as a scientist, I would love to get into some conversations about the research, and we can do that later. But right now, I can't help but think, well, marriage, that's about commitment. That's about committing yourself to the same person for the rest of your life, through good times and bad. My husband was there when I had breast cancer, and I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't been there. And I know my kids' partners will be there for them. But I would love to see Minnesota give them the same rights that we who are heterosexual have. And in my opinion, it's not about sex. It's about commitment and loving, commitment, companionship, and living a full life together. So thanks a lot for listening tonight.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Thank you both very much.
Madam Chair.
Oh, Senator Murphy, you have joined us. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, that I missed your meeting tonight.
Oh,
But I was a little busy down here.
that's quite all right. I'm sure that Senator Ortman can probably fill you in on the bills of mine that they tore apart and threw on the floor. But
Madam Chair, we'll get to see them again in Judiciary Committee.
You missed Judiciary to go there and you didn't keep it away from us?
Madam Chair, I had a chance to amend the chair's bills in Transportation Committee, so we can have a full hearing in Judiciary.
All right. Senator Murphy, welcome to the committee.
well, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, and normally I don't come to other folks' committees that I'm not on, but this is twice in one day. I was upstairs at Senator Solin's committee hearing earlier.
Madam Chair, he and I had some fun together in that committee. Took a few shots at each other. It was great.
But Madam Chairman, I come here tonight in respect for an old friend of mine. I served 4 years in the Marine Corps with this man who was gay, and he's no longer amongst the living. He gave his life for our country, and I think that we owe it to people who are in same-sex relations to have and enjoy the same things that we have as heterosexual couples. If people in the gay community are willing to be outstanding members of community, and we just heard from one testifier about her daughter, who she's very proud of, and if people are willing to be people and be decent people, then we should be decent and respectful back to them. If people are willing to give their lives for our country, spill their blood, give their sweat and their tears, then we should do the same for them. And you know, I come from a pretty conservative district, and I think everybody in our district knows how I feel about this because I have told this story over and over again. My friend died for our country, and he was a gay soldier, a gay Marine. And I just feel that this whole issue about gays being married has been so overblown and so distorted, and it makes me angry. Especially knowing some of the gay people in my life that I know, like Senator Dibble, who is nothing but the epitome of a decent human being that is not afforded the same opportunities as me because of a sexual preference. I just don't feel that's right, Madam Chair. And if your committee can change it, I would be honored to vote yes.
Thank you, Senator Murphy, for your input.
Thank you.
We have, let's see, Carolyn, Stephanie, and Emma.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Hazen, and I'm here with my partner, Carolyn Dish, and our daughter, Emma, who is 5 3/4. 3/4 is very important. Senators Moa, Olson, and members of the Judiciary Committee, Carolyn, Emma, and I are here today in support of Senate Files 1732, 120, and 1210 to enact marriage equality for our family and for the thousands of other same-sex families living in Minnesota. Carolyn and I fell in love 10 years ago and immediately began to dream of our future together, marriage, children, and a happy life full of family and friends. So far, our dreams have been coming true. Like many couples, Carolyn and I wanted to be married before we started having children. Despite the lack of legal recognition, a wedding was important to us, personally and socially. We made our vows and exchanged rings in a beautiful ceremony in the summer of 2003, surrounded by our family and friends. My often skeptical and rather gruff stepfather later told us it was the best wedding he had ever been to. Shortly after our honeymoon, we began trying to conceive, and Carolyn got pregnant the first month we tried. Emma was born on April 26, 2004. I was in the operating room that day, holding Carolyn's hand, nervously watching her undergo a C-section. Our doctor handed our child to me, and we learned for the first time that we had a little girl. Though the staff at the hospital treated us as a couple and as equal parents, the law did not. Because we were not legally married, Carolyn was Emma's only legal parent. My name did not go on Emma's birth certificate, and I had no legal rights to her. We had to go through a lengthy, expensive, and intrusive adoption process involving home visits and letters of recommendation for me to be legally recognized as the parent of my child. Had Carolyn died during those several months of waiting, Emma would have been taken from me, as I was a legal stranger to her in the eyes of the law. Married couples who use donor insemination to conceive do not have to endure this agonizing process. Up until that time, we had been living in California. After Emma was born, we began reevaluating our quality of life. We were spending 2 to 3 hours per day commuting to and from work. I know it's wrong. We didn't live in the best neighborhood because housing was so expensive. Our local elementary school didn't have a very good reputation, and both sets of grandparents lived out of state. That wasn't how we wanted to raise our child. We eventually decided to move and debated moving to Massachusetts, where my family lives, or Minnesota, Carolyn's native state, where her family still resides. It was a difficult decision. Do we go to Massachusetts, where our marriage would be legally recognized, or Minnesota, where we would continue to live as legal strangers? When we first got together, I had told Carolyn that I would never live in Minnesota. I envisioned year-round snow and ice and cold weather. But after spending time here visiting her family over the years, I grew very fond of this state. We ultimately decided that Minnesota would provide the quality of life we were seeking for our family, and we moved here almost 4 years ago. We have created a wonderful life here. We have grandma and grandpa, aunts, uncles, and cousins nearby. We love our Northeast Minneapolis neighborhood, found a fantastic elementary school for Emma, and we've made a ton of friends, most of them straight couples with children Emma's age. Our lives are very similar to other families with children. We both work full-time, we pay taxes and worry about our bills, we spend time with our extended family, we juggle activities like swimming lessons and birthday parties, and try to make it to church on Sundays. But our family faces an additional burden that most of our friends do not: the lack of legal recognition of our relationship. Lack of marriage equality takes a financial and emotional toll on our family. We are deeply hurt by our marriage and our family being illegitimized by our government and our society. We worry about the what-ifs. If one of us is gravely sick or injured, our visitation rights, ability to make medical and end-of-life decisions on each other's behalf will be left to the whim of hospital personnel because we cannot be legally married. Sure, we can put together a patchwork of legal documents, but none of them grant us full equality under the law. And as we have seen in other cases involving same-sex couples in Minnesota, they are often insufficient protection. We worry about our retirement years, since we won't have access to one another's Social Security survivor benefits because we cannot be legally married. We are hurt by the tax penalty we pay on domestic partner health insurance benefits, a tax we pay because we cannot be legally married. We are tired of not knowing which box to check when asked if we are single, married, divorced, or widowed. Single? We've been together 10 years and have a child together. Married, of course, but not in the eyes of the law. But our government's failure to recognize our marriage does not just hurt Carolyn and me. It hurts our daughter. Current law sends a very loud message to Emma and to the thousands of other children being raised by same-sex couples in Minnesota. Your family is not valued by the state of Minnesota. Your family is not a real family. Emma is well aware that her moms cannot be legally married here in Minnesota. She has asked us many questions about why we can't be married. Having to explain to your child that some people don't think your family is okay is very painful. One day, Emma asked me when we would be able to get married. When I told her I didn't know and that it could be a few years, Emma replied, "It'll be 1,000 years," and started crying. Like us, she longs for the day that we can finally be legally married. For a child, having to wait a few years for your family to be considered equal seems like an eternity. The state of Minnesota has a vested interest in protecting children and families. Marriage strengthens families and provides stability for children. We ask that you protect and strengthen our family. Please enact marriage equality. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. So, Emma?
She's very shy.
You came all this way and you stayed up way past your bedtime. Are you going to say hi?
No. Emma loves the Capitol building and was so excited to be here tonight, and especially for this.
Ms. Dish, did you want to say anything?
No, I think she said it all really well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you both, and thanks for bringing Emma. Now you're making me really homesick for my kids. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Let's see. We have the Reverend Frost Lee, Ms. Johnson, and Ms. Meyer. Can all three of you come up to the table?
Didn't you skip it?
Oh, I did skip somebody. I'm sorry. Can you hang on? Yes, we'll have Mr. Weed and Mr. Blanche. Welcome to the committee. Whoever would like to start, please just state your name for the record.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for hearing this important issue. My name is David Wade, and I live in Minneapolis with my partner and spouse, Michael. Michael and I have been committed partners for 15 years now. And we are very happy that last year we had the opportunity to be married in the state of Iowa, which is not only the state that I am from. I know there's some danger admitting that when you're in Minnesota. There's some jokes out there. But it's also the place where Michael and I met and where my family are. And it is an amazing feeling that I was not quite prepared for, to be not only married, in front of my friends and family, my loved ones, but to know that our marriage was on equal standing with the marriages of all of the couples who have been married before us in the state of Iowa. So we've lived in Minnesota now for 10 years, and after this experience last year, getting married and the joy that really brought to our lives, it made both of us consider more some questions about the status of our relationship here in Minnesota. How is it that our marriage can be real in one state, but not in Minnesota, where we call home now? How is it that we can draw a line in Minnesota to say that some couples in loving and committed relationships can be married and others cannot? I remember one of the things I was very excited about in moving to Minnesota is the history of strong civil rights leadership. And so that question stands out in my mind. I love my partner today as much today as I have for the last 15 years. We are married in our hearts, and now we are married in Iowa. But it troubles me that our marriage doesn't hold that status here in our home state today. And the reason why this troubles me is what happens to us when we don't enjoy many of the same legal protections as straight married couples do here in Minnesota. I hope that we never face this situation, but what if one of us were sick and one of us needed to step in to take care of the other? Right now we don't have the same legal protections as straight couples in Minnesota. And that's, to me, today, it seems surprising to me that it could be that way. So we're here today to speak for ourselves and the thousands of other couples like us who are in loving and committed relationships that would ask the state of Minnesota to recognize marriage equality and to erase the line that divides and makes some marriages less equal than others. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senators. My name is Michael Blanche, and I am David's partner of 15 years. And I'm really excited that you are discussing marriage equality and extending legal recognition and protection for all loving, committed couples. I grew up in Minnesota, not too far from Fargo, North Dakota. Heck of a deal. And I met my Iowa partner in Iowa. But a little background, it's interesting. I've never testified before. I've done 15 years of service work with nonprofit organizations as a community organizer, fighting to protect Minnesota's lakes, our rivers, fighting for legislation for workers' rights. And I've never been testifying for my own rights, which is weird. And I always thought that I didn't need the church or the state to recognize the relationship I have with David. And when we got legally recognized in Iowa, it was just really amazing. And I realized that we were recognizing values. And, I've been to hearings, not at the table. I've seen there's two sides, and the arguments about biology and culture, religion, and all these things, and it's kind of divisive and divided. And I realized there's one thing that I know about Minnesota is Minnesota values. We're not divided on that. And it was my mom and my dad, like probably everyone else here, that taught me that marriage was love, commitment, responsibility, honesty, accountability, support, all those things. And my mom and dad taught that to 3 boys. My brother Mark, who's married to his lovely wife, Julie, for 20 years. My little brother Tim, who's been married to his wife Trish for 12 years. And then David and I have been married, well, we just got married in Iowa, but been together for 15 years. And I think it was this summer we got a chance to get married in front of our family and our friends, and they recognized those values. And by recognizing those values and affirming love and commitment, they were affirming their own relationships. And that affirmation made our relationship stronger, and our affirmation to one another made their relationship stronger. And it was just really great. And so I guess I just want to close with a thought that will extending marriage equality to same-sex couples, will that affect other people's lives? I hope it does, because denying or withholding legal recognition and marriage equality for all, I think actually undermines Minnesota values and weakens the definition of marriage the way my mom and dad taught me. And by extending those legal recognition, protections, and equality, we're just catching up to the Minnesota values that have been here for a long time. So thank you for your leadership and allowing us the chance to share our story.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And this is Reverend Frost Lee.
That's correct.
Welcome to the committee.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I serve as pastor at Calvary Evangelical Lutheran Church in South Minneapolis, and I'm a resident here in Southeast Minneapolis. I grew up in Vining, Minnesota, at the time a community of 82 people in west central Minnesota. Today, I come before you and I share this story. This past December, a 5-year-old in the congregation which I serve was preparing to be a flower girl in a wedding. She was excited. The dress and the twirling, walking down the aisle with flowers, and standing in front of the whole community. At the rehearsal, however, she started to get nervous. And trying to ease her nerves, I asked her what the best part was. Was it the dress? Was it the flowers? Was it going to be standing in front of everyone? And she looked at me and she said, "Pastor Brad, the best part is they get to love each other, silly." That 5-year-old was able to recognize the significance of love between two people. In this case, the love between two men who were able to stand before their friends, their community of faith, and before God, and to express that love for one another. What an incredible witness. As another witness, I come here tonight as a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, a denomination that met in Minneapolis in August and with a 60.6% vote resolved that we as a denomination commit to finding ways to allow congregations to choose, who choose to do so, to recognize, support, and hold publicly accountable lifelong monogamous and same-gender relationships. While this was not without discussion and was not without disagreement, the decision speaks to a mainline church which comprises nearly 20% of our population in Minnesota, and to their valuing the commitment of gay and lesbian couples. This speaks to a church that wrestles with scripture and tradition and comes out believing that there is room for gay and lesbian couples not only in civil rights and in civil relationships in society, but also in congregations and in our faith tradition. Tonight, you have heard those who oppose the rights, lives, and the dignity of their fellow citizens. It's heartbreaking for me. My guess is that many of those individuals have not journeyed with a lesbian couple where one of the partners battled breast cancer for 5.5 years, only upon her death to come to the cremation society and funeral home and to have them ask for a blood relative or a spouse's signature for the final paperwork. Or maybe they have not walked with a gay couple who have held, cared, and prayed together as one of the partners was let go from his job due to the difficult economy that we are now experiencing. Work in which they then struggled to rebound together as a couple. And my guess is that many have not seen the joy of a lesbian couple who has just adopted a girl after 2 years of anticipation, a powerful witness of community. Now, the scriptures that I have inherited are fairly limited in what they say about marriage, especially compared to other topics, and are even more limited in terms of examples living out what we might consider to be a healthy marriage or relationship in our standards. When many couples come to me to begin their premarital counseling and begin looking at scriptures for their readings, they bump up against this hurdle. But lodged within the pages of Holy Scripture are these words. It says, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. These words, this covenant, were made from one woman, Ruth, to another woman, Naomi. And over the last 6 years, I have read these words at more than 12 opposite gender marriages and at 2 same-gender marriages. Maybe tonight and in the days to come, we in this great state of Minnesota, a state of fair-minded citizens, can hear these powerful words and their application for both opposite gender couples as well as same-gender couples, and that we can come to believe, like that 5-year-old at Calvary Lutheran Church, that the best part of the marriage, whether gay or straight, is that they love each other. Silly.
Any questions for this group of witnesses? Senator Limmer.
Pastor, your biblical verse you just referenced, that you aren't saying that the two characters that were saying that to one another were gay, are you?
I am saying that it was a commitment between 2 women that was made known in the book of Ruth.
Yeah, but it was not a gay relationship.
It was a relationship between 2 women who cared for each other greatly.
That's correct, but it didn't have the same depth of relationship that a marriage would have.
I think there are scholars who would argue on both sides of that issue.
Senator Limmer.
Madam Chair, Pastor, we had other clergy before us earlier tonight. They'd made reference that God's word on marriage has not changed from the Old Testament to the New.
I would also
Pastor?
Madam Chair.
Hang on a second. Let Senator Limmer ask the question, and then I'll call on you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We have to go through the chair. Even I do.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Can I begin?
Yes.
Thank you. See, I'm well trained. The reference that I'm trying to get at is do you disagree with the clergy that was here earlier? We hear conflicting messages as policymakers. And I think every one of us respects people of faith. People of faith have very strong roots in the way we have created our Constitution. Our history is embedded in that. So at times, especially on these type of issues, we do resort back to some of these early echoes of our beginning to give us direction. It's a good thing to do that. But when we hear conflict between references like this, we get confused. So are the references that were made earlier of the New Testament and the Old Testament wrong? Or are they just a continuation of a continual theme that points the way for society to act?
Reverend?
Madam Chair and committee members, with regard to the issues that were raised, I think that we can find diversity both within the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament, as well as those of Christian Scriptures, the New Testament. We find the Apostle Paul in his letter talking about the best route being not getting married at all. And so that would be one illustration within the New Testament that would fall outside of the scope of one man, one woman. Similarly, we find examples and references to one man, one woman. We hear other items within the New Testament that point in a variety of directions. Many in terms of scholarship today would look at Romans 1, which is often cited by many who oppose same-gender relationships, and would recognize that the Greek words that are used are rare and are not found in other scriptural background or other scriptural resources, and are even unfamiliar in terms of the Greek, and seemingly point more towards what were at that time cultic practices or other types of love. So I think, just to be aware, we find a wide variety, and even in terms of what is considered the New Testament, there is not one simple and single moral understanding in terms of marriage.
Any other questions? Senator Higgins.
Madam Chair, as the born and raised Iowegian at the table,
It was wonderful hearing that you were married in my home state. And it brought to mind a couple of quotes from the movie Field of Dreams, you know, the one, build it and they will come. But the other one is, Dad, is this heaven? No, this is Iowa.
Any other questions for these witnesses? Thank you very much for being here. Members, we have had testimonies from both sides on the bills, although I might say we strayed from the judiciary tradition of making the testifiers stick to the specifics of the bills in front of us. But today we made that an exception because it was important to give an opportunity for both sides to express, I think, their positions on these bills. And usually you start a little bit high up and then you leave it to the rest of us to kind of get into the weeds of the specifics of the language to try to capture the sense and the testimonies that came before us. So members, any discussions on the specifics of the bills as we have heard from the different testifiers who have come before us? Senator Higgins?
Madam Chair, there are two more testifiers listed on our agenda. Are they not speaking?
Ms. Meyer and Ms. Johnson said that if time permits, they would love to come and speak. If not, they would be more than willing to take questions or answer questions. So,
well, Madam Chair.
Senator Higgins?
On Senator Torres Ray's bill, Senate File 1731, we probably need to fix the effective dates, which were written last year, it looks like. So the last section, we should probably change a couple of 2009s to 2010. Line 2.8 and 2.10.
Madam Chair.
Senator Limmer?
Madam Chair, are we planning on voting on these bills tonight?
Senator Limmer, the bills were brought to the committee, and the authors request that we, because if we were to mark up the bills and to try to take a vote tonight, we will not have the time. So the authors have asked us to hear the bills, to present it before the committee, but to leave it in the committee so that if we can create an opportunity at a future date to come back to mark up the bills, we would like to do that. The agenda for tonight was to have the authors go through the bills so that we can understand the mechanics of it and to take testimony from the public. And so we've done that with other issues in the past, and that's the intent today. Senator Higgins, as we move forward, if we get to a point where we will be bringing these bills back for a vote, we'll go back and have the authors review the bills and make sure that all the effective dates are where they need to be. Members, I must say that the Marty bill and the Dibble bills, Senate File 120 and 1210, in some way are big bills where I think different members of the committee might feel differently about where we want to be. And so that's one discussion. But I have to say that Senator Torres Ray made a very compelling argument for her bill with respect to full faith and credit, and I find that to be a very very compelling from a judiciary standpoint. That despite where we are as a state and as a matter of public policy, and we find it in other areas where, regardless of how we may differ with other states in terms of how they regulate and they recognize marriage, or in other country for that matter, as a matter of law, we've given full faith and credit to that. And in this instance, we're not doing that. And I found that she made a pretty compelling argument. That in that way we're not giving the uniformity in treatment as we do in other areas in commerce as well as in this area. And so I really like her bill, and I like all the bills, but I found her argument to be very compelling. Any other thoughts or discussions? Senator Higgins.
Madam Chair, are there other circumstances in Minnesota law where we don't recognize what a legal contract or a legal action from another state?
Ms. Pontius?
Madam Chair, Senator Higgins, I don't think there's anything that specifically doesn't recognize it. We have a number of uniform acts that deal with how you handle cases that affect different states, like child custody cases is one example, but nothing that is of the nature of what you see in the marriage statute.
Madam Chair.
Senator Betzel?
Madam Chair, Ms. Pontius, I'm trying to remember the answer. I don't recall if there's other states that recognize what are called so-called common law marriages. Minnesota does not, where if two people live together for a while, they're considered to be married. It's my understanding that if they move to Minnesota, the fact that some other state would recognize that doesn't necessarily mean Minnesota would. But I'm a little fuzzy on that part.
Ms. Pontius?
Madam Chair, Senator Betzel, I know Minnesota does not recognize common law marriages. I don't know if there's been a Minnesota case involving one from another state. I think I recall a case from another jurisdiction where it did fall under the public policy exception to full faith and credit. So people who came to a state that didn't allow common law marriages from a state that did couldn't get the marriage recognized in the second state. But I'm not aware. I just haven't looked at it in Minnesota.
Senator Ortman.
Madam Chair, not on that issue. So if you want to finish on that issue, I just wanted to make a comment when it's appropriate.
I think it's appropriate.
Okay. Madam Chair, thank you. I wanted to thank all the testifiers that are here tonight. I really appreciate how much this debate has evolved. I know that Senators Dibble and Marty were here, and Senator Betzold and Limmer when I first heard marriage bills in this committee in 2003 and 4, and they were the most painful hearings at the Capitol that I recall. When the whole discussion was about whether the Constitution should be amended to become a sword, to hurt people, to identify people as different and create disparities, and it was a terribly painful conversation for us to have around here, and one that was very difficult to hear. And tonight, instead, I hear a very hopeful debate, hopeful that the state will recognize folks with a change in the law, and it's remarkable really how far we have come. I don't know whether we will adopt any of these bills tonight, but the whole debate has changed 180 degrees. And for that, I'm so grateful. I'm certain that you all must be. If you haven't seen it, I definitely see it. And I see that minds and hearts are changing on this issue every single day. I don't know when the majority of Minnesotans will switch, will change, will support your views. I don't know that. But I know minds and hearts are changing on this issue every single day. And honestly, it's a great relief to me. And Senator Dibble and Senator Marty, Senator Torres-Ray, I thank you for bringing these issues to the committee. Again, Madam Chair, I don't know whether we'll move forward on these bills or not, but I just wanted to remark how much of a change this has been for me. So, thank you.
And Senator Dibble.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I wanted to provide some comments if the committee was starting to come to a close here. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Ortman, for your words. And I completely agree with you that the fact that we're not completely inundated with media, I think, is some testament to how far we've come on this issue. And I don't know what's going to happen exactly with these bills. I do know that the governor is fairly hostile to this idea. He makes that known on a regular basis, quite clear. And he seems to think there's some benefit to him in expressing that frequently. So that's just simply a truth and reality that we live with, that legislation is passed by the legislature but needs to be signed by a governor, and if he fails to sign or vetoes it, it's subject to a veto override. I don't know where we are right now in the full legislature, but nevertheless, I think we have done accomplished a lot, even in just this event this evening and having this conversation. Quickly, before I forget, I did want to respond quickly to a couple things. I'm very happy that the clergy was here, and I'm very happy that they were expressing their views and kind of what animates their life and their spirituality and the like. But I just, it needs to be noted that we do live in a civil society, and we don't live in a theocracy. And so our laws are are based on the public's good and premised on the idea of religious plurality. We have the U.S. Constitution here, and the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And it goes on, of course, to talk about free speech, the freedom of the press, etc. Our own Minnesota Constitution, Section 16, says, titled Freedom of Conscience, no preference to be given to any religious establishment or mode of worship, and has a fairly extensive paragraph that talks about the enumeration of the rights of every person to live according to the dictates of their own conscience, and that shall never be infringed. And that there goes on in Section 17 to say religious tests and property qualifications are prohibited. No religious test in any delivery of any public trust that's available from the state, etc. So I'm happy that people live their lives spiritually in a religious fashion. I'm just as happy that I'm free not to have to live under those dictates, because, as Professor Carpenter said, it'd be very hard to track religious doctrine in the establishment of our laws, because there are as many views as there are churches on that subject. I also, Madam Chair, just also for the record, simply need to respond to the claims of reparative therapy and conversion therapy. And if you look at the packet that OutFront provided, I think back on the third page, it just shows that every professional organization that deals with mental health services, the American Psychiatric Association, Psychological Association, Psychoanalytic Association, Medical Association, Pediatrics, and on from there, have formal resolutions or policy statements that oppose conversion therapy. And it's illuminated probably the best in the statement of the American Psychiatric Association that says the potential risks of reparative therapy are great, including depression, anxiety, and self-destructive behavior, since therapists' alignment with societal prejudice against homosexuality may reinforce self-hatred already experienced by the patient, and it goes on from there. So I just, for the record, needed to provide some rebuttal to that testimony that hadn't yet been provided. Madam Chair, thank you to everyone who came tonight, both proponents and opponents. I think we've had a fair and thorough and civil discussion about an important matter that's in front of the citizens of this state, and we see that this is a very dynamic, very vibrant, very pressing issue. It matters deeply personally to those of us who are married in other places but not here, or seek to be married, because the issues are fundamental to our ability to come together and form stable families, to express that love and commitment, and to provide our greatest gifts to our larger society and our community. And I know that this is going to happen, that this is about making the foundations of our country, the notion of equality, of access to opportunity, of freedom and fairness, more true. It wasn't true for women, for people of color, for lots of other people when we first founded this country. But we came to understand that that foundation of values and principles becomes more true over time, and that's what we're seeking to accomplish. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Marty?
Madam Chair, only one sentence, one quick comment, and that is I realize that this is not likely to happen this year, but I think a few years ago people thought it would be decades. I'm hoping for Emma's sake it's 1 year and not 1,000 years. I think 1 year is reasonable.
Senator Ray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am very hopeful and very inspired by Senator Orman's comments. And I believe as well, Senator Orman, that we've come a long way. For me personally, just for a disclosure, I came to this country 22 years ago and come from a very Catholic family with very strong religious values. And so it's an issue that I learned about as an adult and as I became a parent, as I said in my testimony. So I wish for an opportunity, Madam Chair, where I could bring my children and my neighbors' children to come before you. Senator Orman, you were not here when I told the committee that in my neighborhood I have very close friends who are lesbian women, and we became parents almost at the same time. So our kids grew up together and are best friends and take care of each other. And I wish for this community to see that, that these are loving families and that we respect each other and have promised each other to really fight for each other's rights, whatever they are. And so I am very appreciative of your time and this opportunity, and I hope that we can come back to talk about these issues and the experiences that we've gone through the years. So I'm also very pleased to be here on a very positive note and hearing the testimony. Although some of us agree or disagree with these concepts, I was just very pleased to hear the testimony from all the testifiers. Thank you for coming tonight.
I want to give a special note of thanks to Mr. Pritchard and Ms. Myers, who both helped to organize our testifiers to be here tonight. I appreciate you really making the effort to make sure that we have the really good witnesses here to give their perspectives. And it has definitely been very helpful and informational to the committee members to have the kind of quality of testimony that has been before the committee. I certainly hope that we will reach a time yet when we will have an opportunity to consider these bills. I think it is certainly appropriate for us to make that decision or to have those discussions in this committee. And it is personally important to me to do that. At one time, I think, I know one of our witnesses talked about that, but at one time I think that it would have been difficult for someone like me to be sitting here chairing this committee. And I think that if I can sit here and be the chair of this committee, we definitely have the opportunity to move forward. And so I'm very hopeful, and I thank you all for the respect that we've all shown each other tonight, and for the information that you've presented to the committee. And committee members, thank you very much. I know that it's been a long day for all of us, but I deeply appreciate you hanging there and being engaged in this conversation. The committee is adjourned.
Okay.